Good afternoon. This is Marcos Breton, columnist with the Sacramento Bee, and welcome to our Facebook Live discussion with Sacramento Mayor Darrell Steinberg. Mayor Steinberg, how are you?
I'm doing well tonight, thank you. How are you, Marcos?
I'm doing well. Thank you for being with us as always. There's a lot to talk about, so let's get right to it. I guess, Mayor, I would begin from a very simple premise, and then you tell me if you agree with it. You're in a tough spot when it comes to trying to deal with a police department whose chief does not technically report to you, whose department has a very powerful union, and so it's difficult for a civilian mayor to do what many advocates are asking him to do. And so I would say that would you agree that you're in a tough spot right now and that you're being asked to do things that maybe you believe aren't possible?
Well, I don't agree with the last part of the question. Yes, I'm in a tough spot, but I've been in tough spots all of my political career. I would even say some tougher even than this. And I signed up for this. And so it is my job to take that tough spot and to actually do something purposeful, bold, and meaningful, and to deal with all of the real challenges that make it a tough spot that I have and find a way through them, around them, and actually demonstrate to the city and to the state and as part of the country that we have heard the message, that I am personally reflecting deeper than I ever have on my own life, on my own privilege, and figuring out how I can be an even better leader. Because I've been a very good leader throughout my political career, and I believe as mayor, I was reelected overwhelmingly. But it doesn't matter. What matters is what we do now moving forward. And so, yes, it is a tough spot. Part of it is the system and the structure. The police chief does not report to me, which makes it all the more important that he and I deepen our relationship, if you will, and for me to understand his very real challenges, for him to understand what I am dealing with, and for us to play our respective roles, which are different, but to lead in ways that demonstrate to the people that we are going to respond in ways that are going to make people feel that we're pursuing not just peace, but justice.
But on the narrow subject of having a police department deal with police brutality, you don't really want to deal with that, do you?
Of course I want to deal with that.
Well, the reason I ask is after Stephon Clark, there was a Citizens Police Commission that was sort of rejoined. Mm-hmm. They formulated a number of recommendations related to use of force in the fall of 2018. They couldn't get an audience with the city council until March of 2019. And it's been a whole year later. And this afternoon, I watched their last meeting in March of 2020. And I personally, if anyone would watch the video, would describe that meeting as kind of a joke, in that they were going around and around trying to figure out how to get on your calendar. So why would anyone believe that things are going to be different this time as opposed to after Stephon Clark, when not a whole lot changed?
So let me tell you where I stand on these particular issues. Before I became mayor of Sacramento, in the waning days of Mayor Johnson's administration, the city council, together with the mayor, reconstituted the police commission. And it was a compromise version, if you will, of a police commission that did give the commission some enhanced powers, but they really weren't spelled out as well as they could have or should have been. I want to tell you where I am going here, and I don't want to be, I don't want to give out the entire set of proposals this evening, but what I want to say to you is that within the course of the next week, that as mayor of this city, I intend to lay out a series of very specific proposals. And here are the principles. Number one, the single biggest problem that is a threshold for me, and I think for many people, around the issue of police accountability is the lack of independence, real independence, when it comes to decision-making and or at least recommendations. In other words, the police department has a very good, solid investigative unit. The question of criminal liability rests with a district attorney. Prior to the passage of AB 1421, which is the legislative bill that created more open records, when it came to all alleged violations of the law or policy by police officers, neither the police chief nor the city council could in any public way describe the progress of the investigation or the disposition of the discipline. Now, what 1421 has done is opened a door. It is said for the most serious violations, officer-involved shootings, deaths in custody, incidents relating to allegations of sexual assault by an officer, that a city council, an accountability commission, an inspector general, a police chief can in fact tell the whole story and tell the whole story in real time. And so what we intend to do and what we are working on now is to actually take that opening and to make a very specific proposal around how we can create a independent review in our city. And when that is done, the whole commission and will be seen in a very different light. Now, I'm not going to, again, give you the detail about exactly how we intend to do that and whether or not new power would be invested in the commission or in the Office of Public Safety Accountability. I want to leave that for at least a few days. But I can tell you that the commission is very well intended, well led by Mario Guerrero, good members, but in part, you can put some of the responsibility on me and on us, absolutely, because we did not work as closely with them as we could have or we should have. But part of it is also the form. And we are going to enhance the form, the power, and the responsibilities of the entire operation, the Office of Public Safety Accountability, the commission itself, and we're going to have something in the end that is going to represent some form of genuine independent review, at least for the most serious kinds of allegations.
Would that independence include? Let me back up. So when the police commission made the recommendation of tightening the use of lethal force as city policy, one that's more stringent than the current state guidelines. There was a little bit of discussion before the council, and then it went nowhere. Why did it go nowhere?
Well, first of all, I think that the city and the police department, since Stefan Clark, has in fact tightened some of the use of force criteria. The number one example, of course, which was most prominent around the Clark case itself, is the foot pursuit policy. The foot pursuit policy was a standard practice that said police officers should pursue people they suspect of criminal activity on foot. Now the policy has changed. It says foot pursuit should be a last resort. And that is maybe the most significant change, in addition to some of the other significant changes.
Why shouldn't excuse me for interrupting, why shouldn't deadly force be a last resort?
Well, deadly force is a last resort. I mean, that's the state of the law now. That is, I mean, I was one of the few mayors in the state that stepped out to actually support AB 392 when the police officers union and others were opposed to the bill. And so that changes the standard for not just our city, but for the state. It says that deadly force has to be a last resort. It's only where it is necessary, as opposed to reasonable, which was the standard prior to 392. So in fact, our policy is different, and we're governed by state law appropriately, and we've incorporated that change. That is the law.
San Jose is discussing eliminating the use of rubber bullets. Are you in favor of that?
I am in favor of looking at that, but I want to tell you that this whole question, let me state my position very clearly. Were any protester who is peacefully protesting is injured by a rubber bullet, a beanbag, pepper, whatever, a pepper ball, whatever those, quote, non-lethal forms of enforcement are, that is wrong, and it needs to be called out. And whoever engages in that needs to be held accountable. On the other hand, where there is provocation, I saw a video, for example, over the last 24 hours of the protests, where somebody in a mask approached a line of officers with a knife. And the officer or officers used the beanbag to basically stop the individual from approaching. In that particular instance, I am glad that there is some ability to use some of those non-lethal forms, because without that, that individual probably would have been shot wielding a knife. And so I think that it should be looked at and reviewed, and certainly where it is used in a way that is not appropriate on somebody who is not engaged in an act that threatens the life of someone or the life of an officer, using that on a protester, if that's what occurred, is wrong. Now, here's the answer, ultimate answer to your question. And again, it comes from an early decision by Chief Hahn to decide early in his tenure that the police department was going to go well beyond the law that required the release of only limited amount of video within 30 days of an incident. They release a lot more video. And so for all of these issues, including some of the ones that have been reported extensively in the press, good, bad, or ugly, they are going to soon release all of the video of any confrontation during the protest, which resulted in anyone being injured. And I want to see those for myself. And if an officer used that weaponry in a way that was inappropriate, then I'm going to insist on accountability.
So you have not seen the video of the high school student who got hit in the face with a rubber bullet?
I have not. I have not. Was that the one in front of the DA's office, or in front of the one in front of the DA's office?
It was the video that really. I didn't see a video of the bullet striking him, but it was a video of the teenager who was picked up, and then they took him, and it turns out that he's a student in the Sacramento City Unified School District. It was that one.
I'm not sure if that was the one involving the sheriff or one involving the city police. If it's the city police, then that video would have already been released or will be released, and so I will look at that.
Should the use of tear gas be stopped in the city of Sacramento?
Same answer. Where tear gas is used in any way to try to limit the ability of people peacefully protesting, it should, of course, not be used, and those who use it should be held accountable. Where, however, tear gas is used in order to stop anybody who is threatening with a weapon of their own, either another protester or a law enforcement officer, in those limited circumstances, I would rather non-lethal force be used than having the only choice being something that could end a life versus tear gas. The whole thing is troubling. The whole thing is troubling. But you want me to say, or maybe I shouldn't say you want me to say, there are people who would want me to say, under all circumstances, the use of tear gas is wrong. And I suppose that would be a satisfying answer, and it would be a correct answer in the eyes of many. But I'm going to try to give you a thoughtful answer. And I think the body cam and the early release of video gives us an opportunity to assess whether or not tear gas during these protests was used either necessarily, as the use of force standard requires for deadly force, or whether or not it was over the top. And I want to see that video, and I won't be afraid to call it as I see it.
Are you, as a political leader, are you concerned about the use of the phrase defunding police in the current context? In other words, it seems to me that it's a misnomer, but that people are now actively seeking politicians like yourself to divert funds that would have gone to police departments to other priorities in the city. And you're facing that right now. Can you address for the viewers your reaction to the defunding rhetoric and how you think that will play out in the city of Sacramento?
First of all, I am not offended by the term because I think it provokes a necessary debate and discussion. I don't agree with it if it means we should end funding for the police, or even take significant, whatever you define that, take huge chunks of the police budget plain away. I do think the term doesn't offend me because I choose to look at it in a different way, but I think in a way that could actually be even more transformational. Because the one thing we have not done as a society is ask the fundamental question: what do we expect from our police officers, and what situations do we want them to respond to, and what situations do we not want them to respond to? And so in real time now, I am working to try to get the call volumes over the last couple of years to understand exactly what percentage of our police calls and the amount of personnel power and the amount of money we are sending police officers out to respond to issues unrelated to violations of the criminal law. And of course, the two situations that come to mind most prominently, where we know they spend huge amounts of money and time, are mental health calls and calls relating to homelessness. But there are other categories as well. And when we know that number, I think we can have not just a discussion, but some action around stepping back and asking that question. Because if we decide, and by the way, police officers themselves who are trained in law enforcement are not mental health workers or clinicians. They're not homeless experts. And so what I'm in favor of and would be in favor of is taking the resources that we currently spend having police officers respond to those kinds of calls and shifting those resources to other forms of emergency response that don't involve men and women who have guns and batons and uniforms. Because let's be honest, with mental health, for example, the times I've seen police officers interact with people in mental health distress, and I have seen it, they have been very, very compassionate. But truth be told, why is it good or healthy for somebody who's in the midst of a mental health crisis to be confronted in any way by somebody with a gun, a uniform, and a baton? And so there is a way to engage in the defund debate in a way that actually results in tighter budgets, tighter police budgets, that results in more money for health and human services, for mental health outreach, a different way to triage with our homeless population, where the police, frankly, are asked to get too involved too often, and then to let the money follow the function, as opposed to leading with the money. Because when you lead with the money, again, you make a quick and sharp political point, okay, but you immediately polarize, as opposed to talking about and asking serious questions about the function, and then having the money follow the function. And I think we have a great chance to actually be transformative by having the latter conversation, and not just having the conversation, but actually being among the first in the country to not just pilot mental health impact teams, to not just pilot these kinds of new interventions, but actually set a course for the next several years in Sacramento and in California about where the money should go based on who performs the function.
So, but people need to understand that if there are citizens of Sacramento who take defunding in the literal sense, that they should not expect that that's going to happen. That the city is going to continue funding the department. It's that they want that we might envision a changing of how they perform their duties and what duties they perform.
That is right. I do not think the people of Sacramento support a complete or near total defunding of the police department.
But some people even want a partial one, like Katie Valenzuela, who's a council person elect, was tweeting as much, I believe yesterday, the day before, about taking certain percentages of money that were budgeted for the city and then diverting them. And there's some dispute as to whether it's actually the figure that's being cited, but the meaning of her message is that the city needs to look at taking money currently slated for the police department and imagining a different use for it.
I know people would react different, and Katie is going to be my colleague. I appreciate the provocation. I do. And I again agree with the underlying point. It's the how you do it. And it's not the art of the possible, because I'm not talking about how you make the compromise with the police department right at the beginning. I'm not talking about that. I think the more powerful idea is to say in the 2020s, we are not going to have the police department respond to calls that do not involve the violation of the criminal law. And it won't be surprising when those numbers come back and we will see that a significant percentage of the calls that they are currently asked to respond to, that we ask them to respond to, do not relate to violations of the criminal law. Now that will, whatever I propose in this arena, will still be very controversial. But I think distinguishing roles and responsibilities and letting the money follow actually has the potential to be much more powerful than just saying, well, let's take an artificial number off the top and spend it on other things. But again, the defund terminology does not offend me. Katie Valenzuela's provocation, I think, is a healthy one, because we should all be pushed. We should all be pushed. But then you govern, and you govern in bold ways, and you try to achieve a real result. And I've always been about big change. I haven't been about half-assed compromises. Never have been. Why do you think we have a millionaire's tax in California that generates $2.4 billion a year for mental health? That wasn't some legislative compromise trying to appease a lot of the interest, but it's thoughtful. And that's if I have a brand, a good brand, that's what it is, and I'm going to pursue it. But people can judge it. You know, when I come out with a series of proposals next week, they can judge them for whether they meet the mark. I'm sure they will not make everybody on either side of the debate completely happy, but that's the tough spot again that you referred to earlier. So be it.
Is Daniel Hahn a good police chief?
Daniel Hahn is a great police chief.
Why?
Because, number one, he understands the pulse of the community, genuinely. Number two, he has a far reach within our community. And number three, he knows that modern policing must change in the 21st century going forward. He has a different job than I do. I'm a policymaker, and I'm going to exercise that responsibility, even if he and I might sometimes disagree.
Are there tangible things that he has done that you think people can notice now that demonstrates his impact on the department?
Well, I think you look at the number of changes to the use of force and body cameras, for example, that he instituted and went beyond the requirements in every one of those instances. Body cams is the best example. Body cams and release of video
But the release of video was in play before he became chief, to be fair.
Well,
right?
But no, look at the sheriffs.
Well,
no, but I'm telling you, maybe that's
but what I'm saying is I seem to recall before Chief Hahn took place, the very first time the city wanted a release of video, and the interim chief stood before the council and said, I don't have it. And it became like a big thing, and it basically sealed his fate. And so that's what I meant, that the releasing of the video was sort of already in play before Daniel Hahn became the police chief.
It was starting under the last chief, but it was very limited. He had 30 days to release video, and it was only for the most limited number of incidents.
So what you're saying is Daniel Hahn embraced it instead of slow walking it like his predecessors had.
He embraced it, exactly right. And he went beyond the minimal requirement. Same with body cams. I mean, he was ahead of the curve before that was actually required. Look what he did with Stefan Clark. You could say a lot of things, but you talk about independent review. He had the instinct early on to say, we know we have some issues with our district attorney and the way the community perceives her. And so he went to Javier Becerra and he asked Javier Becerra to get engaged. And so look at, he and I have our differences. We have different jobs.
You think he respects you, Mayor?
I hope he does. And I know
I have had council members say to me that they are not completely certain if the chief respects the mayor and the council. I don't know if that's true or not. I have no way of judging that, but I just wondered how you felt about that.
The Chief Hahn respects me, and he respects the city council. I think what we have here and especially it rises every time we have a difficult set of circumstances in our city, is that we always have to remember that we have very different roles and responsibilities here. And that under this system of government, it makes it even more difficult. You and I have talked about this numerous times, that I am the mayor. The police chief does not report to me. And yet, if you listen to last night's, and the city manager puts out the budget, we approve it as a city council. You heard people last night, Mayor Steinberg's budget, the protest last Friday.
People don't know.
What's that?
People don't understand how it works.
But they don't. But the buck stops with me. I have a different job than he has. He manages a department, and he's also a community leader. I'm the mayor for the entire city. And so it is my job to both work with him, to support him if I believe he's doing a good job, which I believe he is, but also to not be shy about stepping out and saying to the people of Sacramento, these are the changes that I think need to be made. And that's exactly what I'm going to do in this moment around how we investigate the most serious incidents regarding the use of force, how we should direct our city budgets now and in the future when it comes to the role of a police officer in our community, how to continue to push to ensure that the use of force policies continue to exceed what the minimum requirements are, and of course, how we can work with the lucky fact that we have an African-American police chief to be a leader around rooting out racism, that where it exists within our police department.
And I'm glad you mentioned, because I have two more. We're bumping up against the timeline, but I think the discussion is important enough to go a little bit longer. And I ask this sincerely, Mayor. So there was a lovely picture of yourself and the chief taking a knee together symbolically, and so I guess I would say, and I know you know this, but I need you to speak to it. You know that people expect more than a symbol, right? That there's police brutality that has driven people into the streets, and that when we talk about confronting racism, it's true, but racism as it in the form of police brutality is what has driven people into the streets. This time, after Stefan Clark and after any numerous incidents across the country. And you are right, there were some issues like body cams and the release of videos that were a result of after Stefan Clark and some of the other high-profile shootings. but the expectation, I think the public expectation now is for something more transformative than that. And given that the changes from the last time were limited, I guess why would people expect more this time?
Judge us by what we now do, not by what we say. You asked me, and I responded to your questions about what Chief Hahn and what the city have done. And it is our responsibility to build on what we have done, because it is not enough. And I will tell you again, and I am feeling it more than I ever have in my life, around my obligation now as a leader to put forward changes that are not just limited in these instances to improving our use of force policies, but to genuine transformation. And I beginning to define transformation in the categories I've expressed here tonight. We have no credibility if we continue to allow a process for investigating the most serious incidents to be a completely internal process. We won't have credibility. It's a threshold question, and I get it, and we're going to change that. We will have little or no credibility if we don't find ways to divert real resources from the law enforcement function that has nothing to do with enforcing the law to healthcare and mental health services. We must do that. We will not succeed if we don't all dig deeper, especially leaders who are not of color like myself, to own our own stuff and to come to grips with our own privileges. And we will not succeed if we do not continue to examine and seek changes on those techniques around use of force that are still troubling and disturbing to me and to the people of this country and in this community. You're absolutely right. Symbols are important, words are important, but only actions heal.
So the last question would be prefaced by the words, and oh, by the way, we're still in the middle of a global pandemic, and the numbers in Sacramento of infections are on the rise. Can you give people, as we end this discussion, can you give people a sense as to whether you're concerned about that and where we are in real terms in terms of our hospital capacity?
Well, I am concerned because the numbers have gone up 58% in Sacramento County over the last week or so. And yet the whole numbers are still not high enough to make me alarmed. But of course I'm worried. We had said this for weeks prior to the events of the last 2 weeks, that even as we begin to reopen, that COVID has not gone away. And the protests, of course, were essential. And yet people were gathering in close quarters. It all worries me. The county reports that the increase is due to a couple of backyard or home parties and a single church service. And so the message is the same. We have to do what is within our control to prevent a more alarming increase in the numbers.
Can you give people as to where hospitalizations and ICU admissions are right now?
37 hospitalizations, 13 people in the ICU, compared to May 25th when there were 9 people hospitalized and 4 people in the ICU. There were no deaths in the middle of May. There have been 4 deaths since May the 24th. So that is troubling. but I would not yet describe it as alarming. And so we have to watch carefully, but we also just have to take the precautions. I mean, I'm still wearing my mask whenever I am out in public, and if I slip up sometimes, it's rare. But
so there were 2,000 people masked at your house on Friday night, and I was one of them. I had 2 masks on. I'll have you know, 2 masks, Mayor. So I wonder, how surreal was that for you to, I don't know where you were during that process.
I was home.
Have all those people, and have you been apologizing to your neighbors since then?
I've been asking my neighbors whether they were okay, but there's never a reason to apologize for the free exercise of speech and assembly and the great expression of democracy. Look, it was a surreal experience for me, and I didn't go because the organizers asked me not to go. Because though it was about me, it was not about me, and I didn't want to take away in any way from the message, and they did not want me to.
Where were you?
I was at home. I was at home, and I was watching it on television.
Well, you were inside the house?
I was inside the house.
Oh, wow.
Of course.
I thought you were, I was going to say, I thought you were in a bunker somewhere, but you're not the president.
You know what? Every fiber of my being wanted to be out there.
I know.
It did. But I didn't for the reasons that I just described. But let me just say what I've said several times. For me, it was one of the more impactful evenings of my career and maybe my life, because I was moved by it. I was moved by the power. I was moved by the dignity. I was moved by the peacefulness of it. I was moved by the insistence that was being spoken and unspoken by the people, and I know what my job here is, and I am ready. I want a tiny bit of time, as I've expressed tonight, to be able to be thoughtful about the specifics of what I want to put forward and what I want to say. But we haven't even talked about the economic equity piece, which I helped start. But the whole thing, I think, will define my remaining 4.5 years in this office. And I know what my job is and what I have to do, and I look forward to it, working with the community.
We'll pick up the economic piece a week from today.
Okay.
I would conclude our discussion by saying that I had a COVID test done Friday, and I got the results back this afternoon that it came back negative. So I would highly recommend that people get tested. And I will also say that, as always, Mayor, we thank you very much for your time and for your candor.
Thank you always, Marcos. Talk to you soon. Thank you, everybody.
This is Marcos Breton. And this was another of our weekly discussions with Mayor Darrell Steinberg, and during very consequential times in our city. And as always, I wrap by thanking you all for watching and hoping that all of you be safe. Thank you.